Hello, welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, insight into the wonderful world of chess. I am your host, George Marajanian, Program Director for the Wachusett Chess Club, which meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 at the McKay Campus School at Fitchburg State College. And with me today is once again my co-host, Martin Lane of Lunenburg.
Hello, George.
Marty, welcome again. By the way, Marty is one of the strongest and most active chess players in north central Massachusetts. And he is here today. Marty, we're going to discuss an historic event in Fitchburg that happened in March 1964. Because in March 1964, Bobby Fischer came to Fitchburg. Why did he come to Fitchburg? To put on a simultaneous exhibition at the First Church, Unitarian Universalist Church, at the Upper Common in Fitchburg.
Now, in a simultaneous, the player giving the exhibition plays all the other players. They have their individual games, but
Yes.
he walks up and makes his move from board to board. Is that right?
He does. He moves from board to board, and he plays white on all the boards.
And so how did Fischer happen to come to Fitchburg?
Well, actually, the Wachusett Chess Club, which actually became officially the Wachusett Chess Club in February 1960, it was actually one of the most active and well-known chess clubs, actually not only in Massachusetts and New England, but in the country. People knew about the Wachusett Chess Club.
Right.
And we had people who were organizers here, like Rocco Pasquale, who was the president, and Ed Wheeler, the vice president. These are all people well known to Fitchburg residents. And they invited Fischer to Fitchburg because they knew that he was putting on a tour, a national tour from coast to coast in the early part of 1964.
And what did Fischer charge for something like that?
Well, if I told you about it, you wouldn't believe me. He charged only $5 a board. Now you realize
What would a world champion now charge?
I would say a world champion now would be probably in excess of $500 to play a world champion.
Per board?
Per board.
Right.
But back then, Fischer, all he wanted was $5 a board. And the arrangement was for him to play 50 boards. So all he wanted was $250.
And would that cover his travel?
No, travel was additional, but he traveled very inexpensively with a bus or train.
Or people giving him rides.
Or giving him rides.
Right.
And he wouldn't stay at hotels. People would put him up at their houses. For example, in Fitchburg, he was put up at the house of Fred Lawrence, who was one of the charter members of the Wachusett Chess Club. And Fred lived at Brigham Park.
Now, did Fischer have a business manager or a public relations agent or anything like that?
He actually had the United States Chess Federation arrange his tour. So they actually booked Fischer for Fitchburg. Okay. Didn't book him for Boston, Worcester, Springfield, much larger communities that had chess clubs,
right,
because they knew the Wachusett Chess Club was the chess capital of the state.
Okay. So how many people showed up for that?
Well, as far as those who played, 56.
56.
He actually played more players than he had agreed to, because he said to the organizers, the Wachusett people, says, "Hey, I'll play as many as want to play." So it ended up he played 56, but the place was packed. It was written up in the local press. It was written up in the Boston press. It received, attention regionally.
And this was at the Unitarian Church on the Upper Common.
At the Upper Common. So Fischer actually, again, he played 56 people. And one of the people he played was a fellow by the name of Harold Dondas. Does that name ring a bell?
Sure. Anybody who reads the Globe would recognize Harold Dondas. His name is the Globe's chess columnist. And anybody who plays in New England would recognize him as being one of the more active players in all of New England.
Yes, that is very true. And in 1964, Harold Dondas actually was a very active tournament player. He was also president of the Massachusetts State Chess Association. And you know when he acquired the Boston Globe column was actually later that year. I don't know if it was because of his win over Fischer, but it might have contributed to him acquiring the column in the Boston Globe. Well, anyways, Bobby Fischer actually opened the game with E4.
Right. So this was his standard opening. Fischer almost always opened E4.
Yes. Did he ever actually veer from that move? Did he ever actually play an alternative move to E4?
On a few occasions, maybe not more than a half a dozen, he would play pawn to bishop 3, pawn to B3 first.
Yes.
That happened a few times. And during his world championship match in 1972, he surprised Spassky with opening c4, but that was the only time he played that, and those were the only times he veered away from e4.
Okay. But you're saying that he never played...
You'd have to look long and hard to find any
I don't think you'll ever find a Bobby Fischer game where he opened up with d4.
I don't think so.
Okay, well, Harold Dondas had to know that,
Right.
and the other participants in the simul had to know. They had the benefit of being able to review Fischer games, so they knew actually what openings he played, what defenses he played, but of course he's playing white here,
Right.
so they have that knowledge. So Harold Dondas replied with e5.
Which he still does, by the way. I watched him the other day in a game he played e4, e5.
Oh, you saw Harold Dondas recently?
At a tournament just this weekend. Yes.
Oh my!
And he's how old now?
He will turn 85.
Right, he's still active.
Still active.
And
So
then
what did Fischer do against
Fischer
this?
played, now, from this position, Fischer normally would play knight to f3, which is something we've discussed frequently in the past.
Yes,
but
which
this
threatens.
time,
Yeah, that's a good move.
but again, on one of the rare occasions when he deviated from that, he played knight to c3.
Now, this is interesting. Is this typical for Fischer to play knight c3?
Not typical, it's relatively rare. I think I've only seen 3 games where he's played this. This is a signature move of something called the Vienna game.
Aha. It's called the Vienna game. All right, so there must be a reason why it's called the Vienna game.
Well, it got its name, it was played at the Vienna coffee houses in Vienna, Austria, back in the 19th century, in the mid-1800s,
Yes, it did.
I think, or so. It
You're
became
absolutely
popular.
right. In fact, actually, it was Viennese players who actually would play this with frequency, and there was actually a big chess tournament in Vienna. It was the Vienna Chess Congress of 1873, and this was actually played more often than other openings back then. So, and there was a fellow named Karl Hampe. He was a master, and he actually analyzed this opening back in the late 1840s, and it caught on. And the Viennese players started playing it, and then it spread, and then it enjoyed popularity throughout, the 18th century latter part and early. Actually, I think it died in popularity right after the First World War. But Fischer's playing this now.
Sure.
So, and of course we realize this actually doesn't threaten anything.
No, no. David Bronstein, who we talked about in an earlier program, described this as not necessarily phlegmatic, but
Yes.
thoughtful.
Thoughtful.
So it's not sluggish, it's not passive, but it is thoughtful. It's not as aggressive as some of the other moves,
Right.
but it is. It's an interesting
Well,
move, leads to a lot of interesting games.
Is it? Okay. Well, it looks rather innocuous to me,
Right.
But I see that the control that actually White has on the d5 square is quite evident. So what Dondas replied with was knight f6. So he plays the knight here, attacking the pawn e4, but of course that
It's
pawn
already
is defended.
protected.
It's well
So now
defended.
White is free. He doesn't have to, unlike when opening with the knight to f3, where White has to decide how he's going to defend or what he's going to do about that attack.
Yes.
It's already defended, so he's free to do something else.
So what did Fischer do in this
Fischer
position?
played his bishop to c4. Now we've seen this before. We've discussed it, how it attacks along this diagonal, the critical f7 pawn.
This is a weak pawn.
It's a weak pawn.
This is vulnerable.
Right.
And this is a very good diagonal to
It is. It's
have
very
that
strong.
bishop placed on.
It's very strong.
Okay, now, Dondas's move, now he has a choice here. He actually could he could actually bring a bishop to c5,
Right.
or he could bring a knight here to c6. These are two good developing moves for him, but he actually came up with something which has been known for a long time. He took this knight, which was attacking this pawn, which it's defended, but Dondas captured this pawn. Knight takes e4.
Right.
Now, wait a minute. Why can he take a pawn on e4 that's defended?
Well, first of all, it's only defended once.
Yes.
And if this move, the earliest game that I could see was around 1895 or something like that. But the very close of the 19th century, somebody tried this. If White just reacts and takes this knight,
Yes. Looks like he wins. It looks like White wins a piece. Black has just lost a knight.
right? Except that Black has some resources.
How does Black respond to this?
Well, he can just simply respond by pushing the pawn to d5. Now forking the knight, and he's going to get one of the pieces back.
So this fork, which attacks two pieces, he's going to regain one of the pieces.
Right.
Now it's up to actually to White to decide which piece he's wants to give up.
Right.
Yeah. And actually, which
he'd probably want to hang on to the bishop since it's sometimes considered stronger than a knight. So
Okay.
he probably best just to come back here. He doesn't
Okay.
have too many choices.
Right.
so.
Or he could come back to here.
He could there, but
so
then-
that actually when the
Oh,
when
then
this
he
is
could take the
captured,
pawn
take back
back,
with the pawn.
sure.
All right. So let's go back to the position here, where the knight is here. So this is here. So the knight has been taken here.
Right.
So Fischer does not take knight
No.
on knight takes e4,
No,
does he? Because of that d5.
No,
reply.
but he has. We've seen again in like with the games in Morphe and some of the other games we've talked about. He's going to come up with a much stronger threat.
Ooh. What are we threatening here?
Well, by bringing the queen to h5, he has two threats. The strongest one is to checkmate by queen taking that f7. There's that f7 pawn, and here's this bishop.
Defended by the bishop
Right.
on c4.
Right. So that would be checkmate.
So he's threatening mate.
At the very least, he's threatening to take this.
He's
pawn
threatening
back.
also a pawn that's unprotected. So he actually has the major threat of checkmate,
Right.
and the secondary threat of winning this pawn here. All right, so Donda's move. So what does Donda's do? Well, he has to protect this.
that. He has to
that's
stop
weak-
the checkmate.
Right, so there's too much pressure on this square.
Right.
You have the bishop and the queen bearing down with the checkmating threat. So what Donda's comes up with, which is the correct move, he plays the knight, which is on e4, to d6.
Right.
And we see what this accomplishes. This now protects this pawn on f7 and simultaneously attacks this bishop on c4. So that's a very good move. In fact, that's the only move. That's the only move
effective
to
move
stop the
right.
threat. So what does Fischer do against this move?
Fischer's going to maintain the threat because he's just simply going to move the bishop back out of the way to b3.
Right.
It maintains the threat. He can't move the knight yet because as soon as he does,
Okay.
it'll be checkmate again.
Okay. Now, was there an option? Yeah, preserving the bishop is very highly desirable.
Right.
Now, Fischer would not want to actually take this pawn with check, would he?
There is a line where
If he,
players-
for example, if the queen took e5 check, what that allows black to do would actually black could block with the queen, and now actually black could actually force queens off the board.
forces the queen off the board, maintains the threat on the bishop.
Exactly, the bishop's
does
still-
away with the threat on. There's no longer a threat to
Yeah.
checkmate. It's
So I don't think that's Fischer's style to actually. I think he would like to retain his
Right.
queen for attacking purposes.
Sure.
So bishop to b3 is the correct move to retain the bishop. Well, now you see, white now is attacking this pawn, still undefended. So what Harold Dondas did, he played the knight on b8 to c6, and now this is protected.
right.
So it looks like, for example, black is now a pawn ahead, defending this pawn very well. So how does Fischer continue here? He's a pawn down,
He's a pawn down.
and he has
And
to
it
come
looks,
up with
it
something.
looks as though black is getting his development. He's held off the
looks
threats.
like he's defending well.
Now
Although
this-
this is rather awkward, though. Having this,
Right.
seeing this knight here
it's
is rather
blocking.
awkward.
It's blocking everything.
Exactly. All right.
And the other thing is there's still that sort of distant threat of this checkmate. And there is something that white does fairly often in this position, and that is play the knight to b5,
Aha.
threatening to take this knight and remove the protector.
I see. So by
And,
coming
this
here,
is by far and away more common. Fischer did something very different.
what did he do?
He plays d4, which is only occurred half a dozen times in the last century that I can find.
Okay. Actually, this move d4 was actually the brainchild of a master from Massachusetts by the name
Right.
of Weaver Adams. He was born in Dedham, and he was one of the top players in this country back in the 1940s.
And an expert on the Vienna.
Oh, yes. In fact, he wrote actually a treatise on the Vienna. He wrote actually maybe it was a booklet called White to Play and Win. And he was convinced that anyone playing the Vienna game had a forced win. That if you played this knight c3 in the second move, you would win every single time. But of course, we realized that.
I wish it was true.
I wish that were true also. But Weaver Adams came up with this move d4. That's actually his idea. So, and Fischer had to be aware of this idea
Sure.
of Weaver Adams. So he plays d4, and Harold Dondas now must be aware of that too. And what he has a choice here. He can capture this pawn either with the e pawn or with the knight. And he chose, I think, the better of the two. He took knight on c6 and captured. Knight takes d4.
Right.
So, all right, now we take knight takes d4, and I see this knight now is threatening to get rid of this bishop on b3, which is putting the pressure down here. It's Fischer's move. What does he do here?
Well, he could take the pawn with the queen.
Yes.
Check. But that leads to a lot of the same problems that you described earlier. He can block with
He
the
can block
queen.
with the queen, and the queens
force
can be
the
forced off.
exchanges, and that would be the end of the attack.
Right.
Instead, he's going to put this, before he does that, he's going to put this knight into a more aggressive position onto d5.
I see. Now, for example, and also renew the threat of taking queen
Right.
takes e5 check.
Right, now it's stronger.
It's stronger because now the block with the queen cannot be
Right.
be made because the knight controls that square.
Right.
All right. So what Dondas does here, well, he realizes he can't. I mean, he can't protect this pawn in any way. He can't move this pawn up f6.
No, 'cause it's...
He can't expose himself to check. He can't
Right.
put himself in check, and he can't bring the queen here protect that pawn. So what he does. Now, he could have taken here, but I think what he did was something which was recommended by theoreticians is to play the
Right.
knight back.
Right.
So he played knight e6. All right.
And now Fischer regains one of his pawns, and he puts a pin against the king.
All right, so now we have this pin. All right. You know, as I've been saying, Marty, this is rather awkward, having this knight here, which is interfering.
Right. It blocks his
blocks
pawn,
this.
blocks everything.
All right, so what Harold Dondas does in this position, he plays c6. Plays c6, which now attacks this knight and
Right.
says, knight, get out of here.
Yeah, the knight has to go somewhere.
Okay, so but this knight has choices, right?
Right, the knight could go to here,
Right.
or what Fischer played was back to here. There is another move that's been played, and that is this bishop comes to g5,
I see.
threatening the queen.
Right, because he cannot take the knight.
can't take it because
he's
it's
pinned.
pinned.
All right, so that's a
So
possibility.
those are possibilities. But what Fischer did was he came back here, which is a bit rare. It's a rare move and a rare variation, I guess.
Right.
is-
So he did that. So this is rather difficult, for black. But Harold Dondas in this position played queen f6. Now, what is this all about? He plays queen f6, and he actually is inviting. He's inviting an exchange of queens.
Right
here.
now, the exchange of queens would be not maybe to his advantage, but it would be the exchange of queens is good for white at this point, whereas it might not have been so good earlier. Now Fischer takes advantage and he exchanges queens.
All right. So now he does swap
Right,
queens.
he'd avoided it before, but now
Right.
he's
But now he
it's
says now he feels comfortable trading queens.
Right.
This is force. The G takes f6.
Right.
Now, Marty, what I see for black here are these two pawns, which are back to back. I mean, these are what we call double pawns.
doubled and isolated.
Isolated. In fact, there are no pawns
They're-
on either side,
right.
which makes them even weaker.
Right, because they can't, unlike here, they can't defend each other.
So, is this something to avoid? Should actually a
Generally
player-
it is, because it's a disadvantage. Like, as I was pointing out, these pawns, for instance, defend each other.
Right. This is very nice. You have nice.
These don't defend each other. They have nothing defending them on their sides. And so, yes, they're vulnerable to attack, and you have to use a piece to defend them.
Okay.
So that ties
So,
down.
so this should be avoided at all costs, right?
Well,
Okay.
if you can, yes.
All right, so now it's Fischer's move. Dondas just took the queen with his G pawn. So now, what does he do now? Does he develop here?
Yes,
See,
he plays his knight on the G knight to E2.
yeah, he plays it there. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
He had the choice of playing
Yeah, he could have
here.
actually gone there.
This would have been
That's a possibility,
just
right?
as well, but but they're equally good.
Right.
I don't see
Okay.
a big difference.
Well, I see that Dondas actually has this definitely has to move.
Right, he needs to make way to open up his position.
So what he did is he played knight f5.
Right.
So with knight f5, he now is going to allow for this d pawn to move.
Right.
All right. So on knight f5. Now.
And then
yes.
Fischer made a move that puzzles me. I don't quite understand why he did it. He took his G pawn and played it to G4 to push that knight to another square. But
Yeah, you don't know why he played it. I mean, this was very aggressive.
right.
Yeah, and I thought he's going to. Well, yeah, this is actually rather unusual.
To my mind,
What is actually
I
something?
would have castled or
maybe
played this
and then castle
queenside.
which looks very safe. I think in this position, castle queenside may be
Right,
safe.
right,
Castling kingside,
Right.
there might be a danger.
That's
of
open.
this
Right.
semi-open file here.
Right.
So that could be a danger.
So maybe the bishop to D2 and then castling
That looks very
queenside.
solid. Yeah,
Instead,
bishop.
he chooses to push this knight out of there.
Okay.
And
Well, Dondas has to move this knight.
Right, he has
doesn't
to
wanna
do
lose the
something
knight.
with it.
So what he did in the game, he played this knight on f5, Played knight f d4. Played knight d4.
So, to my mind, Fischer just forced it to a good square.
It did.
So, anyway, he exchanged.
Okay. And he has to take back. He
Right, takes back. He has to keep
so he played
material.
knight takes d4.
So
Okay.
now black has a knight on a good, strong square.
All right. So now it's Fischer's move. Now, can we attack that knight?
Yes, he chooses to develop his bishop to e3.
All right.
Attacking that knight.
Yeah. And, well, now this knight has to do something.
It has to do something.
Has to do something. It has to be either
Well,
defend.
it could go back
it
here.
could go back here. Where did it come from there?
That's where it came from.
Okay, so what Fischer does here, I mean, I should say Dondas does. He actually plays knight captures d3. Gets rid of his bishop.
Right. Now, white has two choices. Fischer has two choices. He could take it with the c pawn.
Yes.
But in general, in chess, we say it's better to capture towards the center.
Is that a good rule?
It's one of those rules of thumb because it centralizes your pieces. Also in this position, by opening up this A file, it exposes a double attack on the A7 pawn, the bishop and the rook.
So we have a double attack
here.
here. So this is even better.
Right. So that was a stronger way to capture.
Okay. Well, what can he do? Now, he could avoid this capture, but he could actually move his pawn up if he wanted to.
He could, but that wouldn't really accomplish much of anything. It would create what we call a hole right in here that could become a problem. He can't do this. This is interesting. He can't just block it this way because white could just go ahead and take that pawn. Because now, if he captures the rook,
he would win the rook. Right. Actually, white would win this rook.
Right.
All right. So that would be a mistake.
So Dondas doesn't do that, but he does something that's a good move. He gives himself.
No! Actually, what he does is a logical move is d5.
Right.
Finally moves this d pawn. Right. Now it
opens up the
opens up this diagonal. The bishop now is attacking this unprotected g pawn.
Right. So what this does, by not fooling around here, it's going to be an exchange of pawns, two different pawns, but an exchange of pawns.
Okay.
So
all right. Now Fischer actually takes this pawn because he can do that. What is Dondas going to do? I mean, his either choice is to move the rook over, which puts in.
Well, he's going to lose it.
He's going to lose it, right? He'll lose it. That's right. He can't move the rook.
He has to.
He has to. He's forced.
Right.
The rook here will just allow the win of the rook. So he captures. Rook takes a7.
And bishop takes on a7.
Okay. And now Harold looked at this and said, well, now
he gets his pawn back.
I get my pawn back when bishop takes g4.
And in fact, he's up one pawn.
Exactly. If you count the pawns,
ever since the beginning.
So
he's up one pawn.
So six black pawns versus 5 white pawns.
Plus, he has two bishops over, one bishop and one knight, which is considered slightly better for the side.
Okay. So it's Fischer's move here. Now, how is he going to continue here?
Well, he wants to. Now this bishop isn't doing anything back here. He wants to get it to an effective square. So d4 is a good effective square. It attacks this pawn.
Oh yes, this pawn now is unprotected.
And it also pins it against the rook, so he can't move the pawn up. For instance, he has to protect the pawn somehow.
Well, I concede this pawn can be protected. In fact, there are actually 3 ways.
Right.
I can see actually this awkward move.
Right.
The king coming up and protecting this way.
Right.
But of course, this would block the bishop. But I can see choices now back to either bishop. But is this? Oh, this would not be good.
No, because the pawn is still pinned.
It's still pinned. Yeah. So he keep himself in a pin. So the logical move is bishop e7, which protects. Okay.
It.
So that's what Dondas did in the game. So now it's Fischer's move, and I think actually this is where he blundered in the game.
This is the critical blunder that Fischer made, and he's looking. Now, what's he going to do with this king? He wants to be able to get the rook into play.
Right.
He wants to clear this. So he wants to clear this background. Maybe to put the rook somewhere on.
Oh, so he wants to vacate the e1 square
to put the rook
and to pin
it
this
against
bishop.
it. But he can't go here because the bishop is covering. He can't go here.
No.
This doesn't accomplish anything.
Right.
Moving to here. So he only has, if he's thinking in that direction, he can only go here. If he's on that line.
That must be his plan. He has to be vacating that square for the rook to come over.
It's the only thing that makes sense.
But of course,
there's something he overlooked.
He overlooked one important thing by doing this. This allowed Harold Dondas now to play the strongest move on the board, and Harold must have. I don't know how long Harold took to find this move, but certainly grandmasters would find this instantaneously. Harold played c5.
Right.
Attacking the bishop.
Right. And Fischer resigned.
Why did he resign?
Because he has no place to go. He can only go...
Because I see one
He
square.
goes here, the pawn takes, he goes back here,
Yes.
and then Don just could simply fork and win a piece.
Oh, so he resigned because of this fork?
And winning and losing a piece.
He'd be losing a piece.
Losing a piece in this position would be...
Now, if a strong player actually were to do this, actually play back and lose a piece, would they continue to play even if you're a piece down? Would a stronger player still remember?
It depends on what level you're playing.
So I think maybe Fischer had respect, for Harold Dondas,
Sure.
a Class A player,
Sure.
and decided, hey, I'm not going to battle this out for hours trying to save a lost game.
And even if he took the pawn
Yep.
and regained, the pawn balance, he'd still be a piece down, and that's hard for at this late in the game.
Yes.
It's even for a grandmaster, it's difficult to win against an A player.
Wow.
A strong A player.
Yes.
With being a piece down. Maybe a pawn, a pawn
Right.
down or something like that, you can always come back, but a piece, it's almost impossible.
It's impossible. So
Early in the game, you might be able to, but not.
in this position. No. Okay. So should we talk a little bit about Fischer?
Yeah. So what happened?
Well, has been the most controversial chess player in American history, chess history. He won the World Championship in 1972.
Not since Morphy has another player.
No, Paul Morphy. No, not since Paul Morphy. Yes.
Almost 100 years earlier.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Just about. But Fischer actually said, after he became world champion in 1972, he says he was going to be a playing champion. He was going to play in tournaments and play in matches if anyone challenged him.
Right.
But came 1975, he was supposed to defend his title.
Right.
The World Chess Federation says, Bobby, you've got to defend your title every 3. Back then, you had to defend your world title every 3 years.
Right.
Well, came April Fool's Day. By April Fool's Day, 1975, the World Chess Federation forfeited him because he refused to play under the conditions they set. Back then, they actually had conditions like they would play 24-game matches.
Right.
And Fischer didn't like this idea of, a lengthy game. He actually liked it where the first person to win, I think it was 10 games.
Right. He and Spassky played a relatively short match.
They did. I think they played 20. They played actually not the full 24 games.
No.
But they played. It lasted the whole summer. July, August. You probably
Ure.
Do you remember watching it on TV?
Oh, sure.
Shelby
Yep.
Lyman.
Yep.
On public broadcasting.
Well, I was in Finland for most of that summer. It was front page news all
It
the
made
way
front
along.
page in
It
the
was
Finnish
on-
newspapers?
It was on the Finnish television
it made front
stations.
page news?
And I was then in this country. I was able to watch the last 2 games, with Shelby Lyman.
With Shelby Lyman,
Sure.
yes, who actually, because of that match, went on to become actually a very famous, chess columnist,
Right.
and he's syndicated around the country. But Fischer, what's happened to Fischer actually? 20 years later, after 1972, he was forfeited, stripped of his title. He was actually played Boris Spassky in Yugoslavia. Now, in 1992, the U.S. government had an injunction against anybody going to Yugoslavia. You couldn't even appear in Yugoslavia.
Well, we'll have to save more Fischer stories for later.
Okay.
We're running out of time.
Are we running out of time?
We're out of time.
Well, I guess we'll have to wrap it up. Now, next time, we're going to have to... Do we present another game?
Maybe another Fischer game.
We could present another Fischer game, or actually, I've been thinking, Marty, maybe we can bring about bring chess and music. I mean, you're a musician. You play the violin and you love music, and there are a number of actually musicians and composers, well-known composers.
We'll save that for another time.
Okay, then we'll save that for another time, and we'll bring in the chess and music, chess and art.
Sure.
And we'll save it for another. So, again, next time we'll bring you another edition of Chess Chat where we'll bring you a game from the past with analysis and commentary from Marty Lane and myself. And I hope you enjoyed this analysis and commentary we did today on the Harold Dondas Bobby Fischer game. Thank you again, and good night.